Welcome everyone to another exciting, awesome, amazing milestone of an episode for the Average Ontario Anglers Fishing Podcast. So that's right. This is the big 75.
Wow.
We're getting close to 100. We'll let you know when that happens. But 75 episodes.
And that's why we played
Jesse.
our groovy, cool, OG, super old intro music. And we're just doing it this time because
it's nostalgic.
It's nostalgic.
Now, Jesse, did you ever think we'd get this far?
You know, we haven't said this in so long, but I never thought we would get past episode 36.
I never thought
I don't
we'd
know
get
why
past
that
episode
number,
7.
But yeah. So if you've been following along this long, or if you just started and you've never heard that OG intro before, thanks for following along. And here's to the next 75 episodes.
Yeah, I like that. Positivity. Yeah. Jesse's always going on, we'll stop doing it and stop being fun. And now he just said, we're locked in for 75 more episodes. That's always good news. Now, we have a really cool podcast topic for you today. And we know it's transitioning into the fall season. And a lot of people think, big baits, big baits, big baits. And yeah, that's true. It's awesome. So we're a little late on this topic. But at the same time, it still works even in the fall. There are still going to be days when fish are going to be finicky. There are still going to be days when you need a nice, perhaps smaller, finesse presentation. The topic is Ned rigs. And I'm talking about, like, hey diddly ho, neighbor. I have a Ned rig for you, buddy. No, I'm not that Ned. A different Ned. This one isn't built as muscular, and I don't want to see him going down a ski hill because they're small baits like this, and they're not very, built up. But it feels like you're casting nothing at all. For those Simpsons fans, you definitely got that reference. Anyways, Jesse's a little lost, so we're going to move on to our interesting fishing facts. And Jesse has that handled for us this week, and I've heard that he's kind of kept it on topic. So you might be experiencing this huge, giant deep dive into the Ned rig world.
So I totally lied. It's totally off topic.
Perfect.
I just said that to throw Andrew off the scent. So I thought I'd do kind of a story time interesting fishing fact at the same time. This is something that happened to me recently. About 3 weeks ago, I was camping up near North Bay, and I had a particularly good day. We had just got to the backcountry site. We had set up our tents, our hammocks. We were ready to go. Andrew wasn't there because he was at his cottage. But what happened was I went out fishing, and within 2 hours of fishing on a new lake, I actually caught a good muskie, which is rare for someone like me who is an average angler. But I caught a good muskie and actually caught it on the classic Rapala Super Shad Wrap in this old OG. This is an old OG Finland one, so it's an old one that I got at CanCast at the tackle swap. This color here,
because you can't get that color anymore.
You can't get this. This color is called brown craw or something like that. And if you ever see this color, it kind of looks like a goldfish. It's like orange. At the bottom, there's bright orange.
It's like a smallmouth pattern almost. Didn't they mark it as a smallmouth pattern?
It's called brown craw. So it's not really brown at all. The top has a little bit of brown on it, but it's pretty much just like, I describe it as like an orange fire tiger almost, but just orange and brown. It sounds disgusting, but you look at this lure and it just screams fish. And every time I see this lure now, I bought it. I have 3 of them now. Great musky lure. It's not a huge musky lure, but it is a great lure. It works really good. You can cast it, you control it, you can fish it so many different ways. And the way that I was fishing this one was, I was fishing it like a dive and rise. So what you do is you cast it out. It floats because it's made of balsa wood. And then you just jerk your rod down and it'll dive down into the weeds. Not that far, maybe a foot or 2. And as it dives down, it has this tight little wiggle. And then you think, oh, I'm going to snag because it's in the weeds. But no, you stop and it floats back up. So you can fish this over shallow weeds very effectively. And then if you get to an open spot, you can continually jerk it in for that erratic action, or you can just straight retrieve it. And then say you're heading back to the campsite or to the launch, you control it. It's a very versatile lure. Anyway, I caught a muskie and I was pretty happy. And it absolutely smashed it. When it rose up to the surface, it came up and smacked it on the surface. So that was cool. But that's not the interesting fishing fact. After I caught that fish, I was on cloud 9. I was so happy. You know, when you catch a good fish finally, especially muskie, because they're so hard to catch. And you're just like, yeah, that's awesome. So I was going back to the site, and my buddies were there. And I'm standing in the water pulling my Sports Pal canoe with a little 2.5 horsepower on the back. and I felt something brush along my leg along the shoreline. And I didn't think anything of it because, we fish a lot of lakes that are full of weeds and, branches and stuff like that. But this particular lake is mostly rock. So I was like, okay, something touched my leg. That's kind of weird. And I didn't think anything of it. All of a sudden, I looked down and there is a 3-foot long water snake right beside my leg, right there. And I'm not afraid of snakes, but I like to know where they are. I don't want to just look down and see it almost wrapped around my leg. So I was kind of like, oh crap, look at this. It's huge. So I called my buddy and his wife over and they're looking at it and they're like, holy smokes, that thing is huge. And it was a northern water snake, which I'm sure if you've ever been anywhere around Ontario, and we're going to talk about this, they're quite common. Yeah, I'm sure me and Andrew have seen more than a few over the years. This is probably one of the biggest one that I've seen.
I've been bitten by a fair share myself too.
And we're going to get into that, but spoiler alert, they're not poisonous. So anyway, as you can tell, because Andrew's still here. But this is probably the biggest one I've seen. I'd estimate it at least 3 feet long. Apparently they get bigger. We're going to get into that. But as I was looking at this snake, it had a full-size toad, not like a little toad. It was a big toad in its mouth. And I felt bad because it was kind of like one of those nature's metal scenarios. But this snake had this big toad in his mouth, and the toad was kind of its arms and head were hanging out of its mouth, and it was trying to hang on to things like branches and stuff along the shoreline so it wouldn't get killed. And we poked it with a stick. Not the toad, the snake, because I was trying to show them. I got a few pictures of it, and it slithered away. The sun was setting. It was kind of majestic. You see this snake slithering along the surface with this toad in its mouth, and then just disappeared underwater. And that got me thinking. I was like, I don't really know a lot about water snakes. Again, a very common occurrence. Some lakes more than others. I remember that one lake, Andrew. I think that was Balsam Lake.
Balsam Lake is loaded
full
with
of snakes. Full of them.
Loaded.
Yeah. So you may think, where are these snakes? Are they all over the place? The answer, sadly, is yes, if you're afraid of snakes. So the northern water snake, it's not all over Canada. Luckily for us in Ontario, it's mostly in Ontario and Quebec. So basically it's southwestern Quebec, across southern Ontario into central Ontario, pretty much north to North Bay, which is where I was. That's pretty much as far north as they go there. And they go all the way east to the shore of Lake Superior. And it's actually one of the most common snakes that you'd find around lakes. Now, it's not the only water snake in Ontario, but this is by far the most common one. Now, I was kind of curious about how big these things can actually get, because generally, on this trip, I actually did end up seeing a few more water snakes, but most of them were pretty small. But Andrew, what would you say is the average size of these snakes? Just a normal one.
Most of the time when I see them, they're maybe 18 to 20 inches long. Yep. I have seen a few that, a handful maybe that reached about 3 feet, but that's about it. And at 3 feet, they're getting thick. They're a pretty terrifying snake.
Big. Yeah, the one I saw, it was actually it was slightly if you were afraid of snakes, this would be terrifying. Especially just knowing it's out there, if you're trying to swim or sit on the shoreline, because they're always on the shoreline, hunting for frogs and, other things too.
But the ones I've seen have been about, as I used to have a ball python, and it's about that size. Ball pythons get between 3 and 4 feet long usually. The odd female can be 6 feet, but 3 and 4 foot, that's a substantial snake.
That's a decent snake for sure. So it says that the average length of these northern water snakes is, when they're adults, is between 24 inches, but they can be over 45 inches long. So we're talking almost 4 feet long. Now that doesn't sound that big, but like Andrew said, snakes are kind of like northern pike. Once they hit that 30-inch mark, they start to get girthy. So these snakes, they get pretty big. I mean, you could see definitely possibly a 48-inch water snake swirling around in the water there. Now you may wonder, how do they get so big? What do they eat? Well, they eat toads, obviously, as we found out. But it says the northern water snake, it eats fish, amphibians, mostly. It will eat other things. If it can obviously catch other things that are
if it's around
getting too close.
It usually eats a glizzy or two.
I had no hot dogs that trip, actually. But yeah, so its main source of food is actually fish. So these snakes actually have the ability to stalk and hunt fish underwater. That's pretty creepy.
I knew that because I found out firsthand. It was terrifying because I was catching sunfish, and I had one of the biggest ones I've seen personally. It lashed onto the sunfish that was on the end of my line.
Wow.
And it fought me because all of a sudden I'm fighting this little like 3-inch sunfish, and then all of a sudden I'm fighting this 4-foot behemoth or 3-foot
Ugh.
behemoth. Like, it was terrifying on an ultralight, and it would not let go. Like, it held on to that fish.
See, they are pretty much like northern pike. They attack fish that are on the line. So yeah, they eat fish and amphibians. Like, there's oftentimes lots of frogs and toads, obviously, too. Actually, this campsite we were on, there was toads everywhere. You had to be careful not to step on them. That's why they're everywhere. Maybe that's why there were so many snakes there. But I thought there were some interesting facts about these snakes really quick. Obviously, this article, it's funny. It's like, these are excellent swimmers. Obviously, they're called water snakes. They're obviously excellent swimmers. It's like, if they're called the water snake, they drowned all the time.
Snakes
They're
in
terrible.
general swim very well.
Yeah. So the cool thing is these snakes can dive up to 3 meters below the surface and can be found several kilometers from shore. So they can swim far.
That's crazy.
They're not just going for a little like jump over the puddle there. Like, they're going across the lake in the middle of the lake. Imagine being like 3-4 kilometers offshore and you see a 4-foot snake swim by. Like, what are you doing here? Hunting.
Imagine going into your bilge pump. You're like, going up inside.
Just turn it on. It says, although the snake usually swallows small prey head first upon capture, this is the funny part, or gruesome part, I guess. It may carry large fish to shore before consuming them. So you may see just a random snake carrying a large fish to shore to consume it later. So now,
and they can actually hold stuff out of the water with their head, can't they? Like, like even that toad, I think when you're showing me some photos, like, it's swimming away and it's holding this like heavy toad in its face, and it's above water just going away.
Maybe it didn't want to get water in its mouth. I don't know.
Yeah,
I'll have to ask it
imagine
next time.
seeing like a snake, again, a kilometer offshore, and all of a sudden you're like fishing this school of bass, and just a snake swims by with its head out of the water holding like a fish, taunting you like, you suck, I caught something you didn't.
We're gonna have to make our own mythical beast of a water snake legend. We'll have to do that for Andrew's next fishing lore episode coming up. So this is the last fact I'm going to tell you about these water snakes. Now, again, they're not the most beautiful snakes that you ever see. They're kind of a brown molted color, but they're good looking snakes.
Their pattern is gorgeous.
It's gorgeous, yeah. But this is the scary part about these snakes. So be warned if you're someone that is afraid of these slippery devils. They're not slippery, but you know what I mean. In their water there. So it says that northern water snakes are curious and not as wary as humans as other snakes are. So normally you see like a garter snake or something, and you see it sees you, and it's gone in the opposite direction. Water snakes are actually curious and oftentimes will come up to humans to investigate what's going on. So that's terrible. It says that it may even approach swimmers as it investigates the source of ripples in the water, which could be from a fish or other prey, or if it mistakes them for a floating log or other debris it can hide on. So if you're floating in the water, paddling around, don't be, too freaked out. If a 4-foot long water snake slithers up to you, tries to eat you for one, or thinks you're a piece of floating debris that it can bask on. So that's terrifying. But anyway, that was my story, and that's a little bit of terrifying info about the northern water snake, which you can find in Ontario. So when people say that all the dangerous snakes are in, Australia, they clearly haven't been to Ontario, people. We have snakes that are curious and may bite you. But like Andrew said, they're not poisonous, so don't worry if they do bite you.
Thankfully. It's terrifying, especially I've had some little guys swim up, again, Balsam Lake. I was swimming in a back bay, and I had there were a few, there were always like dozens of snakes you'd find along the shoreline, but a couple times they would actually swim towards me, and I didn't understand it. I just catch them, and I think it's fun. I'm holding a water snake, it would bite me on my thumb, like whatever. Yeah. But now it makes sense, like they're so curious to do that. It's terrifying when you see animals at like POV, like at their level sometimes when they're predatory. I can't imagine seeing a large snake come towards me. I'd feel like John Voight in Anaconda. I'd be like, oh.
And that just goes to show you, Andrew has one of those Savage Gear wake snakes.
Oh, yeah.
And I always thought it was gimmicky. Like, again, I'm not going to say fish don't eat snakes. I'm sure they do, especially bass and bigger predatory fish. But if you're fishing a lake that has a lot of snakes in them, and the juvenile snakes are maybe like 10, 12 inches long, 100% a pike or a muskie or a bass is going to come up and eat that thing, even if it's 2 feet long, right?
Yeah.
So maybe we'll have to talk to our buddy Wham Baits to make a big plastic snake for us.
Ooh. It just looks a big eel like coming through the water.
Yeah.
That's good. I like that. I like story time, Jesse. It's always good. So you made me a liar, but hey, it was worth it for a story time.
See, I was going to do an interesting fishing fact on the history of the Ned rig. Then I'm like, boring. Let's talk about something that's deadly.
Back in 2017 when it was invented. No. So going back to our main topic, Ned rigs. Now, the first thing you're probably asking is, Andrew, Jesse, what is a Ned rig? And can I use it if my name isn't Ned? The short answer, no. You have to be called Ned in order to purchase these. You need to show your license at the fishing store.
Yep.
And second of all, that was also a lie. So you can, anyone can do these. They're one of they're a versatile bait, but also they all, like, you fish them pretty similarly. We're going to go into a lot of different techniques, but when you first see it, you're going to look at, what does that do? It must do nothing. And spoiler alert, that's one of the techniques. So for a description of it, I actually have my tackle tray somewhere. There it is. And Ned rigs essentially is just a jig head. It's a weighted hook, and traditionally it just has an exposed kind of straight shank hook with a standard jig hook. You can also get some now. They have Texas rig style hook and offset hooks. You can Texas rig your Ned rigs, but traditionally it's just a kind of a flat-headed. It's almost like a lead puck that's on a jig hook, mushroom-shaped head. They usually weigh between 1/16 up to around 1/8 of an ounce. You can get heavier ones. They make them all the way up, I think. I've seen some of the big ones up towards like a 1/2 ounce. Yep. 3/8 for sure, at least. But you put a short, soft plastic bait on these things. Now, the original Ned bait, picture a stick bait like a Senko or something like that, or a Wham wobbling or something like that. And you take that and you bite half of it off. And what you're left with is essentially a Ned bait.
Yes.
That's kind of how it all started, was guys using half their stick baits and fishing them. But the go-to for a lot was, people think of Ned baits as Z-Man. This is actually one of the Z-Man lock heads. I think Ned locks. So they have a nice little hook keeper on there, which is fantastic. But so many brands make them now. You got Berkeley, Strike King, Maxcent, they have the Robo Worm. All of these make Ned baits because they become so popular in recent years. Jess and I have talked before how the biggest thing that's been coming up in reoccurring, the biggest theme with fishing recently has been finesse. So it's no surprise that Ned baits have become more popular. And as a little teaser, we're going to be talking shortly about another manufacturer who also has a nice variety of different Ned baits that you should definitely check out. That's a little teaser. We're going to get into that in a little bit. But first of all, I want to ask Jesse, when would you choose to fish a Ned rig?
Well, as a power fisherman, the answer is never. Just kidding. Well, I think, like you said, Ned baits or Ned rigging in general, it's been popular for, I don't know, a dozen years. But it's not one of those fad techniques. It's one of those techniques that every year it's holding on, and that's because it's an effective technique. And for a long time, I kind of shied away against Ned rigs because, again, I'm a power guy. I fish a lot of shallow, weedy lakes. So when I start fishing with Andrew, we fish, more finesse style. So I started giving it a go. I was always kind of against them. Like, oh, there's that kind of prejudice against Ned baits. It's like, oh, that's for stupid people. And, get your fairy wand spinning, reels and rods out. But the fact is it catches tons of fish in almost every situation. Like when the bite's tough, they'll smack a Ned rig. When the bite's good, they'll smack a Ned rig. So it's one of those baits that you should probably have tied on or ready to go anytime. But one of my favorite times to do it is when I'm fishing for smallmouth bass. It's such a good smallmouth bass bait, especially in clear water because it's such a natural presentation. So for me, generally it's a smallmouth bass bait, although you can catch everything. We caught walleye this spring on it, largemouth, smallmouth, walleye, like everything.
How many times have you had pike bite us off?
Oh, so many times. It imitates, it's such a natural presentation. It looks good. So I'd say there's no bad time to throw a Ned rig. If you can get away with it, have it as an option for sure.
Absolutely. And it's one of those things, for me, it's not something that I will always go to first, but it's definitely in the first half of my rotation of things to try. I like to go to it fairly soon on in the day, especially, if the bite is tough. That's when I break it out and I start fishing a Ned Rig. It goes deep. If a storm has come in, fish are usually deeper. Ned Rig is super effective. It's still lightweight, still finesse, but because it was designed, it sinks super quick right to the bottom. You can fish them really effectively. Now we're gonna very briefly kind of go into a few different types of the actual jig heads. We talked a little bit about it, but the standard mushroom jig head, it actually will stand up. It's the most popular. It's the original, and when you have it, when you let it sink down on a slack line or whatever, it hits the bottom, and because all the weight is right there at the top of that bait, it actually stands upright. So it's designed to just have that little stick kind of thing poking up in the air, and the weight will just settle right there on the hard bottom, whatever it may be. But you also have other Ned heads now, so they kind of have more like an arrowhead on it. They have, like I said, the offset hook. They have the Outcast Perfect Ned head. That's another one of the offset weedless versions. You can Texas rig it. So they're more designed to kind of come through weeds a bit cleaner without getting a bunch of stuff hooked onto that head. So they have a variety of different ones. Take note of wherever you are fishing. Like I said, the different shape of the head can do a lot. I know in the past we've talked about different jig heads. The difference between a football jig head, its purpose, it's really good for just like rolling along in the bottom. If you have a swim jig head, it's really good for passing through weeds. You wouldn't cast a football jig in with a weed bed. Like, it just won't work as effectively. So it's helpful to have a couple different options of style of net heads. But another thing is the weight itself. So you can have like a heavier, like we said, up to a half ounce of the big ones. I have some big ones actually. I want to use them targeting for pike. But you can get super finesse ones. So if you're fishing shallow, you don't want the bait to sink super fast, or depending on the technique you want to use, you can have these things be super shallow or super light. So you have a wide range of what you want to do. But the important thing oftentimes at each of the presentations is to maintain that bottom contact. And usually you go for a heavier head when you want to do that. Again, depending on the technique. So let's go into a couple different ones. There are, well, first of all, I want to ask Jesse, do you have a preferred jig style? So we'll talk about that one first then. If you have a preferred style of jig, do you like one that is kind of more traditional, sits in the bottom, a heavier head, or would you rather go with a lighter head or something?
Yeah, so I know we're going to get into this in the different techniques. It depends what I'm doing, I guess. Mm-hmm. I think one of my most effective techniques is when the Ned bait actually has a very slow glide. So obviously a thinner head, or a lighter head. But one head myself that I tried it this year. I thought it was going to be gimmicky, but I actually really liked it. And I don't know if it was just because I'm dumb or if I just, it actually was good. Sometimes you buy a certain jig head or whatever, and you just have confidence in it, and then that bait's going to work better for you. It was those new VMC swinging Ned heads. Mm-hmm. Did I show you that? So it's a half moon head, mm-hmm. but the hook is actually like a Neko hook, but it's attached in the head, not solidly, so the hook can actually swing around. So when you have that floating Ned bait, when it hits the bottom, they float, a lot of them, and it can just kind of pivot around and swing around. And I just felt like maybe the thing has more action in the bottom. But the other cool thing I liked about it is it has the Neko hook. So you can either hook it, like you can just put the hook right through the worm and have the hook exposed, or you can actually rig it weedless, mm-hmm. which again, we went fishing on that lake for walleye, and there's lots of timber and rocks, and I was getting snagged a lot with a regular Ned head. So I put this swing Ned head on, and I kind of rigged the bait weedless. Although it wasn't weeds, it was rocks and branches. And I actually did well. I was pulling some walleye out of like branches and timber in deep water, and I wasn't snagging up. So for me, I think you get more action, on a smaller head, not one of those weedless like stock hook ones, the ones you were talking about, the EMG mm-hmm. ones. But I don't know. I like to try new things. I think that swinging one for me, it's just like I have a lot of confidence in it. But yeah. I answered your question with like 4 things.
That's all right. We're going to be going over all of them again, one by one. Nice. That is cool. Those heads are very neat. And it's good because if you had to get one, it's probably the most versatile style you probably could get.
That's what I was thinking. Because, I mean, if you're in open water, you just hook it regularly. And mm-hmm. if you have some, something that's going to snag you, you just hook it weedless. And these Ned baits, they're so soft. You don't have to worry about, using heavier line. Even when it's hooked weedless on a medium light rod, when you pull back hard, it's going to hook them every time.
Mm-hmm. Now, the first technique I want to talk about for myself that I love doing, and it is surprisingly effective. It's also probably one of my favorite topwater techniques, is the dead sticking technique. And this is not so much as a search bait, but if you have a spot and it's perfect, you see, let's say you have like a big bed of rock or sand, and all of a sudden you see this little stand of cabbage, or you have like a specific spot you want to pitch a Ned rig at. All you do is you cast out to that spot, it hits the water, it sinks, and you let it sit there. And it's, again, one of those things where you're looking at this jig head with a little stick on it, and it's just sunk to the bottom, and it's just standing upright. And you're like, what is this going to do? And for some reason, fish are like, delicious, I'll eat that.
Yeah.
So it's a very, again, probably the easiest technique you could do. You're not going to cover a lot of water with it, but it can be very effective if you know that there are fish there, or you're confident that there is a fish in that nearby area. But another one that we could talk about would be the drag and shake. So this one you can kind of mimic with it. It allows you to cover a bit more water. So you cast out, you let it sit down to the bottom, you do nothing. You reel in, and you just kind of reel in slowly, or you just slowly sweep your rod. You don't want to lift it off the bottom, your Ned bait. You want to just drag across in the bottom. Drag it a couple feet, and you stop. And with that taut line, you just kind of quiver your rod in your hand, and the tip of the rod is moving a little bit, and that vibration is going down to the head of that jig. And what will happen is, because it wants to sit upright, when you shake that line, you're actually kind of pulling it a bit, and it's going to make that bait wiggle. So it's just the drag and shake. You drag a little bit, shake it. Again, slow presentation, bottom contact the entire time. So you have to take note of what you're fishing on top of. You might be losing a lot depending on the bottom structure of what you're fishing. So again, not every technique works for every area. But that is another one that is very easy to master. It's not hard to do. I know we talked before about different things. It can be tough or daunting to have to learn a whole new way to present a bait or way to do something. This is taking it down to like the very easy steps while it's still very effective.
And I might add, that technique is a great technique for beginners.
Yes.
If you're taking someone that's, maybe they fish, but they're fishing for them is chucking a map spinner, and you feel the bite. And fishing a finesse technique may be difficult because you have to be like, feel the bite and feel something off. And, they don't know because they're a beginner or they're a kid. If you're casting out, letting it sit to the bottom, and then just get them to drag the rod, they're going to feel a bite.
Mm-hmm.
And just reel your line back to the rod and drag it. You're going to feel the Ned bait bump over all the rocks, and then you're going to feel a tap when a fish inhales it. So It's a great technique. I've had my nephew, we've been fishing Ned baits. It's, again, one of those techniques. It's like fishing a Senko or a stick bait. It's just so easy. It's a great bait for every skill level.
Mm-hmm. And when you think of what it's mimicking, again, we talked before, it looks kind of stupid. It's so simple. But when that thing's in motion or moving around, if you've ever seen underwater footage of a goby or a crayfish, what do? They shoot around in the bottom and they stop. And the crayfish might have its claws raised or something like that. Or a goby will just kind of sit there like a stick on its side, and it doesn't move. They just sit there motionless. That's what these things are imitating. So are they effective? Absolutely. They're mimicking nature really, really effectively, actually, despite the look. Speaking of little crayfish, we actually have, now I'm going to talk about what kind of alluded to. Another manufacturer that makes some pretty cool Ned baits is Wham Baits. So Wes sent us some packages. He's actually redesigned his packaging. It reminds me of, when I first saw it, all I could think of was the old Kellogg's cereal boxes when it's like new design, same great taste. It's like, let's test it. Oh. But these little handy bite-sized morsels. This one is the Cash and Craw. It's a 2-inch. This is the sapphire blue. This is an amazing little Ned bait. You want to talk about a Ned bait, again, with that technique, to be able to just drag it along the bottom, and then it's just going to sit upright like that, just waving its claws at you. To all our little viewers there, that can't not get bit. Let's be honest, that looks amazing.
Yeah, it does look good. And that dragging technique, like you said, It just imitates a crayfish scuttling along the bottom. Like I know I like using the word scuttling all the time. But
Scuttle and sachet, the two best
Yes.
motions for your lures.
But with this Ned bait, no sashaying is involved. It's all scuttling. All scuttling all the time. So yeah, that's a great bait. I would like to mention before we get kind of into the baits, Wham Baits, Wes from Wham Baits I always call
His
him
name
Wham.
is Wham.
I call him Wham. So anyway, he came over to my workshop the other day and dropped off some of these baits that we're going to ship out to you guys for the giveaway. And he's showing me these baits. Wes is one of the nicest guys ever. We're so, I don't want to sound like we're his parents or something, but we're so proud of Wes. He's done so much hard work. He's such a nice guy. He gives back to the fishing community greatly. He donates so many baits to fishing organizations and to kids.
I think he donates as much as he sells or something. It's a lot.
He is a super nice, legit guy, and his baits are fantastic. We love buying his baits. Every time we go to CanCast, like his booth is like ravaged.
Yes.
Like you'll go and we're like, oh, we'll wait and we'll come back later. It's all gone. People bought it. It's good stuff. So we're really happy that his new packaging, it just looks fantastic. I told him like, this looks like 100% professional. And I know a lot of bait guys that are making baits. The big step, the hard work, all that stuff comes down to it. But when you eventually get your own custom packaging, it just makes your stuff look amazing. And I have to say, Wes, so you're listening to this right now. This stuff looks fantastic. We're super proud of what your brand has become, and your stuff works great. It's worked great for us. And I know a lot of our listeners have bought your stuff too. Tons of people in Ontario, all over Canada, people in the States buy it. Congrats, Wes. We're really, really happy that he's also been supporting this podcast since the beginning. So we're also very thankful for that. So let's talk about his Ned bait. So like you said, you had the little craw there.
Yep.
But if you want to get a legit regular Ned bait, he has his Wham-a-lamb. Of course, Wes has all his cute little Wham names for all of his baits. But listen to this. I'm going to open this. Oh yeah. Hear that? He also has really cool colors. So this is his Wham-a-lamb. This is a regular 3-inch. 3-inch seems to be like the size everyone gets for Ned baits. This is a nice, very cool mold. It's a unique mold. It's not the same one that everyone else has. It floats. Look at that. It's got a lot of action to it.
See,
I wish you audio listeners could listen to this, but this is sashaying right now. It's wiggling around like crazy. So I'm holding this between my index finger and my thumb. Very, very still, and it's just wobbling. I'm not moving it at all, and the thing's just wagging back and forth like a dog's tail. So imagine that on a jig head at the bottom. These float too, just wiggling on the bottom. Another thing I really think that these imitate, Andrew is talking about the crawfish. This is literally a little stick bait pretty much. But I honestly think half the time fish think it's a crawfish just scuttling along the bottom. But oftentimes I think they think it's a minnow. You oftentimes see minnows just pecking at the bottom. So oftentimes you have a Ned bait and it sinks down and it hits the bottom and then you kind of hop it. It just looks like a minnow kind of pecking down at the bottom, not paying attention to its surroundings. Fish just comes up, especially a bass. It'll open its mouth, create that vacuum and just suck that little Ned bait in. And the fish will just swim off like nothing happened until you tighten the line and get a hook in them. So that's a really good bait. I have to say with Wham Baits, he has all the hottest colors, but I'll tell you my favorite ones. You have to know this because this is his best color. In my opinion, Wes has a lot of good colors, but this is his best color right here. This is his green pumpkin copper. This is one of my favorite colors. I have it in several of his plastics. He makes the perfect green pumpkin. It's like a pukey brownish green. I find a lot of people, they make their green pumpkin too green. It should really be called brown pumpkin because it's more of like a greenish brown. It's a disgusting color, but for some reason the fish love it. And then he has this perfect mixture of like copper and gold flakes in it. It's got a little bit of flash, nothing crazy, just like a little scale in the distance the fish might see. But it's such a natural color. It looks like almost everything. It looks like a minnow. It looks like a crayfish. It looks like a leech. It looks like everything. So that to me is one of my favorite colors. If you can only have one color for a Ned rig, in my opinion, it should be some kind of a green pumpkin brownish color, in my opinion. What do you say, Andrew? What's your favorite?
I do like dark colors. I've done well with black. I do like a little bit of contrast. So if you get sometimes you can get stuff that have like a little tip of color, or you can dip them yourselves, get a bit of bright color. But a two-tone like a black and chartreuse or something like that, or like you said, a green pumpkin and and just a little bit of a bright color on the belly. I do like that.
This is another color that is going to be included in the giveaway. This is actually the 3-inch Wham Lamb, and his color is called Violent, or I guess it's supposed to be Violent Tendencies, but it's violet because it's orange, or it's purple, so it's Violet Tendencies. Yeah, looks pretty cool, but it's purple and black. So again, you got some good contrast too. I think, like we always talk about, I don't think color matters as much as the fish, how the bait is fished, and the ability for the fish to see the bait.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like you could have a bait that's black and purple that doesn't really look like anything natural, maybe a leech or something. But if the fish can see it at the right depth and it's the right profile, you're going to catch fish. So we always recommend, usually with almost every lure we talk about, have something bright, have something natural, have something dark, right?
Yeah.
So the same, in my opinion, goes with Ned rigs. Again, you have a dark color like Andrew said, you have a natural color like green pumpkin, and then for those crazy days, get something bright pink or white, and you never know what you're going to catch. So
we're going to move on to a couple other... Are you done there, Jesse?
I was just going to say, we'll talk a little bit about this giveaway in a little bit.
Yes, we're gonna get into what you have a chance to win. So that's kind of a hint
look,
of
listen to this. Oh, just dropped them all. Sorry, guys.
They fell on the ground. 5-second rule. They're all Jesse's now.
I planned that.
A couple other techniques that work really well is getting a little bit faster with the presentation is the hop and pause. So Jesse kind of mentioned that too. Kind of imitating a minnow of it, kind of feeding on the bottom. It's simple to do. Cast out, let it sink. Most of these are let it sink. It is a jig still. You cast it out. Once it sinks to the bottom, you just snap your rod up. You've heard us talk before about snap jig fishing for walleye. Ned rigs are also a very good option. If you don't have a snap jig, you could fish them the same way and target walleye, target bass, target whatever still. Very effective. And what happens is, again, the Ned bait, they usually are floating oftentimes in order to keep that upright presentation when it's resting on the bed of the river or the water. So when you cast out and you let it settle, it sits for a second, and you just snap your rod up a few inches, like a foot or so, and it shoots up erratically and then just kind of coasts down. And the Ned rigs, they'll often sink straight down pretty quick. You'll notice that when you cast out, you're like, I'm in 15 feet of water. How is a 16th ounce jig head or 8th ounce jig head or whatever going to sink down? You cast out, it's gone. It's down to the bottom. So they sink very quickly, so you can kind of work it fairly quick back to the boat. It's going to settle back down nice and quickly for you as you work it. But again, that works really well around rocks, submerged timber, stuff like that, because you're lifting it up and over the cover, and instead of like coasting down into a tree or something like that, it usually just sinks straight back down. So it can be really good for preventing snags when you're fishing some stuff that might be a bit more heavy cover, but you can still fish something that has bottom contact the whole way across, which is very effective. Mm-hmm. Now, what if you have a spot that has even worse snags and you don't want it to touch bottom because you've lost about $25 worth of terminal tackle here this morning alone, and you're like, I still want to fish a Ned rig, but I don't want to just have it in contact with the bottom? It's called the swim and glide.
Ooh.
Much like what we as adults like to do in the pool. You know, you dive in, you're like, yes. You just kind of like glide to the side of the pool because, let's face it, none of us have done cardio in the past 4 years, and we jumped in, and that was a lot for today. So,
you poor little Ned bait.
So picture your Ned bait being Michael Phelps. Just kidding, it's not a topwater. So you cast out, and you can let it sink to whatever depth. Again, they sink pretty quick. So if you're fishing shallower water, you could pretty much start reeling right away. And you just have a slow, steady reel. You kind of fish it like you would with a swim jig. You fish it pretty much the same way. What'll happen is as it's coming across, any action on the water, it'll quiver that little back end of that bait a little bit. But you can kind of just lift your rod up and down and kind of quiver your rod tip. And as this thing comes across, it's going to be tipping off the tops of weeds, hitting off any timber, any rocks that are coming up, and you're just kind of swimming it across. You could be right above the bottom. You could be 10 feet up in the water column. It doesn't matter. As this thing comes across, it can mimic, again, like a minnow very well, but it can also be very erratic. And again, you might think of it, how could it be erratic? It's a little bit of a mushroom head of a jig head and accentless stick on the back end. But like I said, as soon as it hits any obstruction, even just the head itself, because of where that line tie is, it doesn't sit as far forward as other jigs may. That usually the eye of the hook is pretty close to the very front of the bait. So the weight on it is gonna, not quite like a hover rig, but it does sit a bit more horizontal in the water. So when as you're reeling. So when that thing comes in, it is gonna be picking up some vibration from that water, resistance from the water, and giving off some vibration. So even as its own, and again, you could even fish it with a little bit of a paddle tail. If you want a stopover area, you can let it settle. That paddle tail is still going to be moving around. It's going to sit head first in the bottom. So you could fish them effectively in the middle of the water column too. So again, speaking of versatility, that's just fantastic where, like Jesse said in his story time earlier, you have that super shad wrap. You could, reel it in and then stop, let it rise, fish it over the weeds, then keep cranking it. You can do everything with it. You can do the same thing with a Ned rig. You can have that same hook, that same head, but you could fish it anywhere in that water column. You could fish it really slow. You could fish it quick along the bottom, all that stuff.
You know what they say? Any lure's a topwater if you reel fast enough. Even a Ned rig.
I don't want to know how fast Jesse's a power fisherman, so I could see him trying that. But
I'll tell you though, one quick story, slightly off topic. I was fishing one time, drop shot fishing. Hey, and that's a finesse technique. I was fishing weed lines with a 6-inch worm, and I chucked out this cast, and it kind of went like not where I wanted it. So I was just reeling it in fast along the surface, and it was literally like a 1/4 ounce weight, 2 feet of line and a worm, just reeling fast across the surface. And this 2-pound bass came up and smoked it, and I caught it. I was like, dude, it was literally on the surface of the water with a huge sinker behind it. So sometimes fish are dumb.
A lot of time fish are dumb.
Moral of the story is try stuff sometimes. Find out.
Another thing, when you're talking about Ned rigs, we're going to talk a little bit about what they can catch. Primarily, it's a bass technique. But if you don't target bass, or let's say you're done targeting bass, don't sleep on the Ned rigs. You may have heard so far what we talked about of different presentations, and you're like, that could work for insert fish species here. And you're right. It totally could. A lot of guys, and you don't hear it talked about a whole lot, but again, because it is primarily a bass rig, primarily a smallmouth bass rig, I would say. Because guys, I don't really see a lot of largemouth guys fishing it because they're usually fishing weedy, heavy cover. But you could fish these really well around weed edges, along the bottom where those bass are sulking around the side of that thing. So again, anything will go for this. They have really micro ones now too. You can get for crappie fishing, for perch. I actually use them for ice fishing, which is really nice when those perch and stuff are only hitting stuff right in the bottom contact. A Ned rig is fantastic. Fantastic, because your bait is right there. And I caught a few perch on that fishing it last year. But you can get, like we talked about, walleye. You can get walleye, pike, even muskie. We've been bit off by muskie. You can get anything. And you can even get, I think it's called the giant TRD. I have like these huge ones. They look like a really thick Senko, but they're actually a Ned rig. I did actually fish them for bass, and I did get a couple this spring in the pre-spawn fishing those big things, but I did get them to target trying for pike and perhaps muskie in the spring. But now we're going to talk about a few different advanced techniques. So what you've heard so far is beginner or intermediate. Now it's advanced. If you want to really dial it in, we're going to talk about a few different variations. So you have your colors. Like Jesse said, it's good to have a variety of different colors, but if you have clear water, follow your normal color recommendations. So clear water, you have natural presentations, green pumpkin, watermelon, shad stuff. In Ontario, it can be a big difference because we have so many lakes now that are so much clearer than they used to be. The water clarity. So Ned rigs are really effective now because they get down deep where these fish are now as low as they can be in the water column because of the amount of light that's there. So they're down very deep. There's so much light still there that having these natural presentations are working really, really well. And when you see guys when they're fishing the tournament series and stuff like that in Canada and even in the St. Lawrence, but oftentimes in the Great Lakes especially. If you look what they're using, it's natural colors on finesse baits. That's what they do. So if that's where you're fishing, you can fish these awesome from shore too. Try that. I would go with more of a natural presentation. If they are being picky or murky, stained water, you could go with bolder stuff, like blue, black, chartreuse. If you really want to see it, chartreuse is fantastic.
It ain't no use if it ain't chartreuse.
That's my favorite. Not my favorite color overall. Sorry, it's my favorite color overall. I'm not going to say it's my favorite Ned Rig color, but I love chartreuse.
Yeah.
But how do you fish these? What would you say, Jesse? If you were going to fish a Ned Rig, if you were going to recommend the gear that would be required to effectively fish a Ned Rig, what would you say, like to actually have something geared for? What would you recommend?
I know we live in a world now where there's specific gear for every single bait out there. Every fishing magazine, they'll be like, this is a Ned Rig rod. This is a frog rod. I'm trying to get away from that because it's such a scam. You don't need a specific rod for a specific thing. Now, if you're a tournament angler, you're professional and money's on the line, that's what those rods are for, because they want to have every advantage possible. But let's be serious. You can throw a Ned Rig rod on probably any rod you own and be effective with it. But if I had to personally pick a rod to fish a Ned Rig on, in most situations, it's probably going to be a medium light spinning rod. I'd say anywhere between 6'10" and 7'3" medium light, extra fast tip. I want that tip extra fast. So when I feel a bite, when I pull back, it hooks them really fast and it's very sensitive. That's what I would use. 2,500, 3,000 spinning reel. And I'm probably going to go with an 8 to 10 pound braid with a long, 6 to 10 pound leader of some kind myself.
Yep. I would have to agree. That's pretty much that's what I use to fish Ned Rigs. If I have multiple rods with me, I will. But like you said, you can fish it effectively on pretty much anything. I've even fished it on my BFS combos, kind of like my Americanized BFS with some smaller rigs. That fishes them very well. But a medium light spinning rod is probably the most ideal. Again, it's a finesse presentation, so you don't need a heavy rod. You're usually not going to be fishing these in heavy cover. You might fish it around. You're not going to fish it in the actual heavy cover itself. So you don't need a super heavy line, which is great because most of our listeners, I would say, or most anglers in Ontario that have gone out and purchased fishing licenses, you probably have a medium or medium light spinning rod. That's probably what you already own. The only thing to have, I would say the biggest benefit is, like Jesse said, having a really crisp, a nice extra fast tip on your spinning rod will really help you feel the difference between its bottom contact as you're reeling it in. You'll feel it kind of hitting against those rocks. So you can get a bit more knowledge, even just from your cast, as to what the bottom structure is like as you reel in, and you'll be able to feel that bite. You'll usually feel a bite on any rod, I would say, pretty well. I know some guys might get mad at me for saying that, like, oh, you can't feel bites on their stuff. You can. It's just not as they're present. You'll still feel a bite.
Yeah.
But having a crisp rod can actually help a lot. And one thing I think it would actually help with the presentation, it's one of those things where you don't need specialized gear by any means, but a faster rod tip as you're reeling it in. Let's say you're doing the drag technique. If your bait is coming along and it's bumping against little bits of rock or into the mud and stuff like that, a soft tip will kind of it bogs down and it pulls out and it bogs down and it pulls out. Whereas if it's a faster tip, it's immediately going to be kind of hitting that and then just knocking over stuff. So it might have a little bit more of an erratic presentation, slightly. Not going to say you won't catch fish the other one. You absolutely will. But it is, that is what I would say would be your biggest benefit. Just have a crisper rod if you have a choice between a couple different rods.
Yeah. And just to go in quickly, I know I get people ask me this. We literally are going to do an episode on the different actions and powers of rods and what they mean. I've had more than a few people ask me that. So when it comes to rods, rod power and action is completely different. So power is going to be like ultralight, light, medium heavy, heavy, extra heavy, extra heavy, extra heavy. But so for Ned Rig, say medium light rod is going to be, it's going to be able to handle less weight or less power, have less power than a medium heavy rod. And then the action of the rod is where the rod starts to flex when it's under load.
Mhm.
So like Andrew said, an extra fast rod, only the top 10 or 15% of the rod actually bends generally when you're, retrieving. And a fast rod might be, 25 to 30%. So the extra fast tip, just the tip of the rod bends a little bit. Obviously, when you hook a fish, more of the rod bends.
Mhm.
But when you're retrieving and you're pulling it over rocks, like Andrew said, less of the rod is moving. So it's more sensitive because only a little bit of the rod's moving. So you can like bump it over rocks and stuff without half of your rod flexing and just being less sensitive. So that's one thing.
Absolutely.
And I will mention one more thing. Those Canadian custom rods we had, those
Yeah.
are both great Ned rods. And again, we like trying a bunch of different rods. We got our hands on a few of those new Daiwa Canadian custom rods on a walleye trip. That's where we used them so far. I had the 7'1" medium light extra fast, and I think you had the 6'10" medium extra fast.
That's become my go-to spinning rod, honestly. I've
Yeah.
used that a lot for bass. It's been really nice. I really
Yeah.
like that rod.
They're actually really nice rods, and
Yeah.
a lot of them are 2-piece, which is great. I think you
Yes.
got the 1-piece, I got the 2-piece.
I was 1-piece, but a 2-piece is fantastic.
I will say though that Daiwa Canadian custom rod, their extra fast action is pretty good. Like oftentimes when you spend, when you're buying a more budget rod, the actions are kind of mushy and generic. But the extra fast action on those rods, it's very crisp. It's a very crisp rod for $120. So if you're looking to get a new rod for next year or this fall, maybe, definitely, go to Sale, go to Gagnon Sports, go to your local fishing store and check out those rods because they're very affordable price. They're really high quality and the actions are really good, especially for, bottom contact baits. It's a sensitive rod. This may be a big step up for you if you've never bought a rod over $100. But if you do, believe me, your world is about to change.
Really good value for that price range.
Yes.
So yeah, if you're looking for something in that price range, I would definitely say consider those.
Yeah.
The last
just one more thing. I'm joking. I'm just like Columbo. Just one more thing.
Before I go. The last thing we're going to talk about regarding Ned rigs is yet another technique.
Ooh.
It's whatever you want technique. Because you've already heard us, there's that do nothing method, the dead stick, there's the drag it, there's the little hop, there's the snap, there's the reel it in straight, there's all kinds of things. Anything in between you can do. If you want to do a variation of those on every single cast, go for it. So depending where you're fishing, again, you might want to choose one technique over another, but Ned baits, whenever it's become one of those things where actually on that Canadian custom rod, I usually have that tied on a Ned rig recently. I've been fishing them more this year, and I realized how often I want to throw the Ned rig when I'm going around, and sometimes I'll try and like fish slow, so I'll cast multiple different baits at one spot. And every spot I go to, I'm like, I gotta bring up the Ned rig. That would work well here.
Yeah.
I'm like, Rocky Point, I should use a Ned rig here. Like, by a tree, I should use a Ned rig here.
It's so versatile.
I should use a Ned rig here. Like you can flip these things. It doesn't matter. You can put them anywhere. And again, the only reason why I don't fish them in heavy cover is because I'm usually fishing on a medium light or a medium rod. But like I said, I have some Texas rig jig heads, and I have fished them on my medium heavy, and I have fished them in cover. And guess what? They catch fish.
Yeah.
So if there's anything, you can rip them like hair jigs through there. Do whatever you want. You can fish these things however. So if you have heard something you want to try, a technique, by all means, go out, try it. You don't have to get complicated. If you haven't bought it, if you don't use a lot of soft plastics, because for a long time, I didn't use a lot of soft plastics because I thought, I don't know how to fish them properly. I have to put all the action into this bait. I'd rather just cast and retrieve. If you want to do that with an Ned rig, you can. But it's also one of those baits where as soon as you start learning a couple of these other techniques, which may just be reel slow, or don't reel at all, or shake your rod as you reel in, all these different things, they're very easy to learn. And it's I would say probably one of the best techniques or best types of fishing to use that bait, to use a Ned bait, and try and challenge yourself to learn different techniques. You're not going to have to change your bait. You're not going to retie all this stuff. And if you know what, this isn't working today, try the next technique. If that's not working, try the next technique. And you can be very versatile without having to change your bait all the time. I know we've talked about a few different baits this year, and we always or often use the word versatile. And that's because Jesse and I have been trying more and more for fishing these back lakes. You might laugh at us, but we only have 4 rods with us.
Each.
You know, it's 4 baits tied on only. If you look at these guys in the tournaments, yes, they have 75 rods in their boat, and each have they have some rods with the same bait on it. So then they catch 5 fish, next rod, and they pick up the next one with the same bait because that's what's working. They don't want to retie. But for us, I just like not having to change my bait. So having 4 very versatile baits tied on at all times, especially with new water, I know and I'm confident in how I'm fishing that water. So if you haven't tried it, I really encourage anyone listening, if you haven't tried a Ned Rig.
And to add to that, like you said, exactly what Andrew said. If you've been fishing for
thanks, Jesse.
But if you've been fishing for a long time, this is not new. Let's be serious. Ned Rig fishing isn't anything revolutionary. It's literally jig fishing. It's jig fishing slightly reimagined.
Yep.
But if you are someone that has not tried the Ned Rig, I guarantee if you buy a bunch of Ned baits, like some of the Wham Baits, buy some heads and your favorite color, the color that you have confidence in, and you go out on the lake and, like Andrew said, you learn that technique and you try a bunch of the different techniques with a Ned, it is well worth it. It's one of those techniques that it will never go out of style. It's like a stick bait. It always works because it's so natural and versatile, and it works for so many different species. It'll be well worth your time to learn how to do the Ned Rig. It catches everything. It's cheap. It's easy to do. Why not learn how to do it? That's what we're telling you, people. Learn the Ned Rig.
And the last thing I'll mention on that topic as well, just continuing that thought, is you can then take those skills you've learned by fishing the Ned Rig and fish other baits in a similar way. If you're fishing the Ned Rig, you're reeling it in, you're shaking a rod tip, guess what? You're well on your way to learning how to do hover strolling, the latest thing now in tournaments. If you are fishing on the bottom, dragging it, guess what? That's like fishing a football jig. If you're casting it through weeds in a weedless, that's a swim jig. You can take these skills by using the Ned bait. It's one that can do pretty much everything, but then you can start branching out into some other baits using the same technique, but with a different bait, may have a little bit different action or a bit better advantage in certain situations. So it's a great kind of jumping off point for you. Now we're going to talk, before we end the show, we're going to talk about the giveaway. So Wham Baits, we have all these awesome bags. They look awesome. The baits inside look even better.
The packaging, I just have to say, the packaging looks absolutely fantastic. Not that it matters. I mean, like, you're going to take the bait out and the fish doesn't see the package, but again, it looks really good. And there's a warning on the back of these, though. Do not eat these. These are not for human consumption, as good as they look. So I'm going to show you some of these baits quick, because he actually gave us a whole box of baits. Now you may think, how many of those baits are you guys going to keep? Well, the answer actually is we only kept 1 bag because he gave us 15 bags and I wanted to split it right down the middle. So we're going to give away to 2 lucky supporting Patreon members. We're going to ship 7 bags each for 2 winners. So you're going to win 7 bags. And I'm going to kind of go through some of the baits. Some of these baits are Ned baits. Some of them are not. So I'm going to kind of show you some of the baits that we've used as well over the years that we've been using Wham Baits. So he actually has the Taxman, which is a 3.5-inch drop shot bait. It's kind of like a thin leech.
I really
super
like
cool.
Those.
Yeah, Andrew has a bunch of them. This is just a natural green pumpkin color. Can't go wrong with that. I always think whenever Wes puts orders together for us for giveaways and stuff, he always gives us colors that I really want. And then when I have to give them away, it's almost like torture. So that's one. Another really good mold that he has, it's the 2.8-inch Quiller. So it's basically, it's like a drop shot bait, I would say. You could also put that on a really small jig. This is going to be good for
I use them
smallmouth
as
bass.
Micro chatterbait trailers. They're really good.
Yes, 100% I could see that. So smallmouth bass, walleye, panfish, anything like that. He has a bunch of his Wambunctious, which is a 3.5-inch swim jig, chatterbait, trailer. You could also do a lot of things with it. You could put it on a flipping jig. Basically a double tail grub. I used a bunch of packages this year. I got a bunch of colors. I got green pumpkin, purple, which is another one of my favorites that he has. And I got white. Great on a chatterbait, great on a swim jig. He has some of his craw baits, 3.5-inch crosher. This is actually I'd say one of his most productive baits. He has the Swimpleton, which is a 3.25-inch swim bait. It's just a little swim bait, and he has these in green pumpkin. This on a little jig head. Smallmouth candy, also really good for walleye.
Those I really like with like a beetle spin. It's fantastic.
Yes. Again, because we're doing a Ned Rig episode, we have a whole bunch of packages of his Ned baits to give away. And again, a whole bunch of different colors. But again, my favorite color, he knows, the green pumpkin copper in this. Each winner is going to win one of those. If there's two. Oh, there's two. You're good. Another really cool bait that he has.
That's right. He's taking one of those out of the package for each of you, and he's keeping the rest.
It says 8 per package, but there's only going to be 7. I'm sorry. I don't apologize. He has these really cool 2.5-inch goby baits, which also could be used as a Ned bait as well. These are going to be good for ice fishing as well if you're fishing for whitefish or lake trout. That's another really good mold that he has. And of course, one of his most popular, he has the Wobblins, which is his stick bait with the bulge in the middle. Has a really cool action. And this is a new one I thought I'd mention to you guys. This is his names are always so wacky. I'm not going to pronounce them right. It's a 6.25-inch, so 6.25-inch finesse essential. So he put finesse and essential together. Huh? See what he did there? Yeah. So it's basically like, how would you describe this? I guess it's a finesse worm with kind of like a spoon tail, like a flat beaver paddle tail. You could rig this so many different ways. I was talking to him. You could Texas rig it. You could Neko rig it. You could do drop shot. You could do anything with this thing. It's just like a very versatile bait. And guess what? Green pumpkin. What?
And a bright color on the tip too.
Yeah. Here's another bait that you could also rig on a Ned. He has his little 3.5-inch Whammunitions, which is like a beaver style bait, but I have never seen them this small before. It's like a little 3.5-inch. I actually bought a bunch of these at CanCast. Really good jig trailer, but you could also just fish this on a little football jig head or a little jig and just hop it along the bottom. But it's just like a crawfish. It's even
really good if you want to finesse like pitching rig. Like you get a nice little finesse jig with those. It pairs really well, and you're fishing the same way as you're fishing your other beaver style baits.
100%. And then the other bait that I'm going to show you guys real quick is he has his Whamphibians, which are like a topwater frog, but don't sleep on these as a swim jig trailer. I learned that this year. Me and Andrew went fishing for a day. And I put this on the back of a white jacked up jig, swim jig. Really cool action. Very unique, very cool.
And this is actually a little bit of lift too. If you rig it like you would a topwater, let's say, it has a wide surface area, so it gives a lot of lift. So you have if your jig is too heavy or you just want it to ride a little bit shallower, rig that like you would a topwater style and put that on a swim jig, and it just like comes like right through it. It's really cool.
Yeah. And another bonus is it skips like a charm. Like when you don't skip charms, I guess, but it skips really good. Like because of the big fat wide bottom. When you whip that, you can skip that right underneath trees and docks if you're any good. I hit it about 50% of the time. The other half, I don't know. So this is another bait I thought I'd mention quick. Wham Baits. It's called the Wham Solo. I'm going to open this up quick. This is also green pumpkin. Smell this. Oh yeah. Wham uses his own Wham sauce. But this is his Wham Solo. This is actually completely custom mold that he designed. This could also be used as a Ned bait. It's segmented body, so you can actually break it off wherever you want. So you could have a regular 3-inch, you could do 4-inch. I think these are 4-inch, 4.5-inch. So you could go in half-inch increments. You could use it for many different things. I was saying to Wes that I'd use that for a little Neko rig on the bottom. It's a very versatile little bait. It's got a little forky little wrench-like tail on the back.
I would use that as a trailer, and then when the tail gets bit off, I just put it over onto my Ned head. That's a perfect Ned rig with the tail gone too. It'd still be a great Ned rig.
Wham is very into versatile baits, like we were saying, and this is one of those baits that you could use for probably 10 different things. So that's another cool one. So anyway, long story short, we'd like to thank Wes again for this giveaway. We're going to give away, I think it's 15, so we're going to say 7 to 2 winners. And going forward, Andrew is actually going to be doing the Patreon video giveaways. So if you don't win, you can get mad at him. Before we end, Andrew, I have a little secret. I thought we could just go a little bit overtime on this podcast because I asked a question on Instagram today. And I said, it's podcast night. Ask us anything.
I haven't looked at Instagram today, so I have no idea what this.
Terrible. So I thought we could do the 5 best questions.
Okay.
So if we don't read your question, it wasn't one of the best ones. I'm sorry.
That's right. And we're being polite. We're just saying try harder.
Yes. There was actually
7 questions.
a decent amount. Well, I'd say about 20. So Ontario Outdoorsman asked, and this is not one that we're going to answer, but he says, are you guys interested in hunting? The answer is no. We like fishing. This is a fishing podcast, so no.
I will say, just to answer that briefly, I used to do hunting, but I only have enough time and money for one hobby, barely, and I choose fishing.
Yes, I agree. I barely have time to go fishing. I'm not going to add another expensive hobby into my repertoire.
I use all my vacation days for the water. Thank you very much.
So Thornburn the Fifth asked this question. He says, how do you become a professional bass angler? Asking for a friend. You are asking the wrong people. We don't even know how to catch bass. You should call up Corey Johnson or the Johnson brothers and ask them.
Yeah.
So here's a really good question from River Smalleys, Ontario. So he says, are you concerned about losing access to water in Ontario due to private landowners? You know, this is a big topic because they just shut down the Ganaraska for salmon fishing. I'm not going to ruffle any feathers to say if I agree with that or not, but I mean, that should have happened 20 years ago, probably. A lot of people are saying that. I'm not saying I'm going to say that, but I'll give you an example. I fished this creek near my grandparents' house where they lived for 70 years. And I fished this creek my whole life. My dad fished the creek his whole life. And a few years we went and they posted it all, private property. And we can't fish there anymore because you'll get a fine if you fish there. So it is happening all over Ontario. Creeks, lakes, different areas on the waterfront are being closed, you know, for angling. The problem is, I feel like, in my opinion, sometimes anglers do this to themselves because a lot of the ones that are fishing there are deadbeats and they're, you know, doing illegal things. They're leaving garbage. They're breaking stuff on people's property. Things get closed because people do stupid things. That's not always the case.
Not everyone does it, but there are enough people who do that makes it issue for everyone.
Yes. Now, is that the reason why they closed down a lot of places? There are other reasons. I am concerned about it. I've said this more than a few times that, you know, I don't trout fish as much anymore because a lot of the streams that I fished growing up, they're all closed. And that is concerning. I have a lot of people asking me, like, where do you go trout fishing? It's like, I don't go trout fishing much anymore because, you know, it's hard to get access anywhere near my house. So, you know, it is concerning. What can we do about it? I don't know. If you have any suggestions, let us know. We can talk about that on a future podcast. That'd be a great episode if we can talk to someone about that. So here's a good question.
In the meantime, I just want to say regarding that, it's important to always remain respectful. So if something is posted now, like you said, there's a creek that his family has been generationally fishing that they just can't anymore. We don't go there anymore, unfortunately. It's disappointing, yes. If we are fishing a place that does have access, we take our stuff out with us. Sometimes we'll pick up extra garbage and throw that out on the way too. It's all about being respectful. If everyone was more respectful, we would have far less of these issues most likely. So just don't, if we try to make a stink about it in some of these places, it might just make the situation worse. So just be respectful with what laws are unfortunately in place.
And ghillie suits are not cheap, man. So here's a good question from Ryan at Angling Haddock. We actually met him at our AOA meetup. Super nice guy, hammer and angler. And he asked this question. He says, what do you find yourself throwing more for muskie, big tubes or medusas?
Tubes.
I'm a big tube guy.
Yeah. Now, I haven't caught one on either yet, but tubes are what I've been trying to throw more. Because for a while, I was casting a lot of hard baits. I really want to get them a hard baits. And I have, but I haven't caught any on like a rubber at all.
Oh yeah,
so
that's going to change this fall.
Yeah, so I'm going to fish in tubes primarily. I think.
I feel like medusas and bulldogs are, you know, they've been so popular for decades now, and they're great baits. I actually have a medusa right here, but this is not a big medusa. This is a mini medusa. So this is pretty much the second smallest one you can get. But I really got turned on. Tubes were kind of one of those like secrets that guys were fishing. Now they're kind of more popular. Everyone's chucking them, but they work really good. They have just like a very natural, gliding, erratic action. And after I fished with Bobby Belmonte, I really, you know, learned how to fish them properly. I was fishing them all wrong. I was trying to fish them like a big, you know, like just hard pulling, pull pause bait. They're the opposite. You got to fish them nice and slow which is hard, like little jerks upwards, I find. And it just gives them this just erratic, you can almost walk the dog underwater. And for whatever reason, the muskie, they absolutely crush them. Like, we have to think, tubes have been popular for how long for bass and for crappie fishing. And, for muskie, it's been probably a few decades now that tubes have been on the market, right? But they work for everything. They're just great baits. If you want to catch a muskie this fall and you have a muskie setup, I wouldn't chuck this with a regular bass gear. But what I have here is a 9-inch gator tube. Mike from Waterwolf Lures, he makes tubes from 7.5-inch all the way up to, I think he's like a 15-inch Magnum tube now. It's absolutely, it's like the size of my arm. But I would say a good starting point is a 9-inch or an 11-inch. And you just go out and you chuck that around some like deep and steep areas and just let it glide down and just twitch it back to the boat. Muskie just come out of nowhere and crush it. Remember that fish we caught last year? I was reeling in this tube, not this one, a different color. And I was just talking to Andrew and I was just reeling it back, and it had a little blade on the bottom, and I'm like, hey, look at that blade. And this muskie just came out of nowhere and just chomped it right side the boat. And we're both like, oh. Yeah. So they do work, and I'm really excited for Andrew to catch his first fish on a tube. I'm literally gonna tie a tube onto his rod, and I'm gonna weld the snap shut so he can't take it off all day. And then I'm gonna throw his tackle box in the lake. And that's all he'll be able to throw. So I'm excited for that. And again, we're not accomplished muskie anglers by any chance, but of the last few biggest fish that I've caught, they've all been on, well, most of them have been on tubes. One was on a big spinner bait, but yeah.
Another reason why I want to use a tube instead of the hard rubber is just hook up ratio, not ratio so much, but the need to set the hook like super hard on those big rubber baits, those hard rubber baits, is you got to pull it through all their teeth and like get those hooks in. So you really got to have a super strong rod to do that with. Which again, you're musky fishing, you're casting that bait, you will. But tubes, because they're so soft and they're squishy and stuff, it's a lot easier to get those hooks in the mouth. So I just feel like I'll have a better chance of, if I botch the hookup ratio, there's still a good chance it'll still get hooked on a tube.
Yeah,
if I botch the hook set.
That being said, though, I'm a big fan of Medusas. They've got, Medusas are the big baits with the three big twister tails on the back. They're a great bait too. So I mean, I think when it comes to any type of fishing, but especially musky fishing, especially, is throw the bait that you're the most confident in. Look at two baits and be like, which one is going to catch fish? Like, which one do I think is going to catch more fish? And generally, unless you're completely dumb, you're throwing topwater in November.
Hey.
Pick the bait that that is proven to work, but pick the color and the bait that you have the most confidence in, and then just go out and chuck that bait, and you're more likely to catch a fish on that bait if you have confidence in it. So you can also get secondhand confidence. Like Andrew knows how much I love a tube because I've caught some of my biggest muskie on tubes. So now he automatically is confident in that tube, even though he's never caught a fish on one, which is great. So oftentimes you can gain confidence by fishing with someone else that has had success on a technique. Or if you go with a guide, like when I went with Bobby Belmonte, I had never caught a fish on a tube. And he's like, oh, chuck this tube here, blah, blah, blah. And I caught a fish. And again, I was with a guide. So it's kind of like, it's not like I did it all by myself, but I caught the fish on the tube. I have confidence now. And then the next time we went out fishing, I was chucking that tube and I caught one on my own and I was so happy. So, gain confidence, watch some YouTube videos, go fishing with someone, and basically just buy a bunch of tubes and go fishing. All right, let's do one more question. I was going to do 5, but we went like super overtime.
Just edit more of the main topic out. No one wants to hear me that much.
It's like, now about Ned rigs. So, musky tubes. Someone asks, do you use megabass rods? If so, what action? I have owned 3 megabass rods, nothing higher than I've always wanted an Orochi, never got one. I had 3 Levantes, I still own 2 of them. Great rods. I'm not a big megabass, like high-end rod guy. I have, for the Levante, I have the Leviathan, which is the 710 extra heavy swim bait rod. I had the 7.5 brailless, which is like kind of a bottom contact rod, which is a great one. I guess only 2 then, but great rods. I'd recommend them for sure.
I like using their lures.
So here is this guy named Nick. He always misses our Q&As. Every time he asks me, oh, can I ask a question? I'm like, dude, you got to follow the Instagram. And he's like, oh, I missed it. So he actually commented, I finally noticed an AOA Q&A. So we got to read his questions. So he asked me this question before, but I thought we could talk about it on the podcast. He says, older rods from his childhood. He has a bunch of 6-foot bait casters. He says, are there any valid use for them now that he's 6 foot tall? So I remember him asking me, should he have the shorter rods or should he get some longer rods now that he's, an adult and 6 foot tall? So I kind of explained to him, like, yeah, like there are some techniques where shorter rods are great, like skipping. Oftentimes, remember back in the olden days, like me and Andrew, the pistol grip, like little 5.5 foot rod pistol grip, and you'd be skipping. Yeah. Now, guys, a short rod now is probably 6'10". That's kind of like a short rod now, and even a 7-foot rod, that's kind of like the low end of lengths. Unless you're using a short rod for a specific thing, like say you're fishing a jerk bait in a canoe, or you're skipping baits, usually in a smaller boat. If you're in a taller boat and the gunnel's a lot higher, a 6-foot rod may not be that advantageous because you're going to lose a lot of casting distance. You're going to lose a lot of leverage when you're fighting a fish. There's not very many advantages to a short rod. So, I'd keep them if they're still good rods. Definitely keep them. Keep them for skipping or whatever you're going to use them for. But generally, I'd recommend at least 7-foot rods, especially if you're 6 feet tall, just for all the added, advantages of having a longer rod, right?
If they're older and they're like IM5 graphite or they're like a mix, or they have fiberglass, repurpose them into trolling rods, because those things, again, trolling rods don't have to have special action, and if they're soft, if they're more of a soft parabolic bend, they're going to be good for that anyways too.
Yeah. And here's the last question. I'm just going to ask this to Andrew. Elijah asked this question. He says, how does your beard stay so clean?
What you don't see is before every episode, me and Jesse kind of pick at each other like monkeys, getting all the gnats out and stuff. Like, gross. It's all just combing it and using beard oil and beard balm and stuff. Just keep it nice and clean. Get all those cookie crumbs out of it.
I was going to say, there's these things called showers that you take, and beard wash is good. Yeah. The gnat thing, I can definitely picture that.
You should try it.
So anyway, we'd like to thank again, huge thanks to Wes at Wham Baits. If you are down to support, and you should be, don't be like, I'm not down for that. You should be. If you're down to support a local guy, lives in Ontario, does a lot for the fishing community, makes fantastic baits, and has been putting in the time and effort, and you have to think how much planning and testing goes into his baits before he puts them out on the market. Definitely give Wham Baits a follow. I'm going to put all of his links down below for his YouTube, his Instagram, all that stuff, his website, so you guys can support him. If you don't win the giveaway, which we're going to do right away, we're going to start doing the giveaways. We're going to have the podcast on Sunday release. We're going to announce the giveaways by Friday that week. So if you don't win the giveaway, make sure you go over to his website or his Instagram, pick up some of his baits for the fall. And if you don't anyway, just give him a message and be like, hey, Jesse and Andrew said to say hi. That's all you have to do. That'll make him happy.
Fantastic. That wraps up our 75th episode. And again, we got Jesse's viewpoint on it, but I can't believe he made it this far either. But I hope you enjoyed talking about doing kind of a deep dive, just like they're going to deep dive into the bottom of the water on Ned Rigs. What a stretch. Jesse is like, this guy's never hosting again. I'm doing 100 episode.
I am. I'm going to do the 100 episode.
But we want to thank you again for listening. Huge thanks again to all our Patreon members. Again, you are all automatically entered to win these awesome giveaways like Western Wham Baits has put together for us. 2 fortunate winners are going to win this time. So even better odds. You gotta love that. And again, thank you to all our listeners as well. If you have a chance to rate us, review us on on your Apple streaming service or on Spotify, anything like that, that really helps us. We're actually having a lot of really good feedback on the ratings, so please keep them coming. We love to read even some of the interesting ones on the air. So if you can write a little blurb more than just great podcast, that's awesome. If you want to put a little sentence about what makes you appreciate it or what you really like about it, better chance we're going to actually feature it on the podcast itself. So there's always an opportunity for that.
If you type out a fun little song, Andrew will sing it.
Can't say I'll do it justice, but I'll try.
And just to be clear, you don't have to write it yourself. You can use AI. We don't care. Andrew will still sing it.
But I do use AI to weed out all the junky reviews. That's all. So anyways, thank you very much again for listening. And before we end the episode, as tradition states, we have the quote of the week. And to handle that, Jesse.
Well, I am wearing my Wham Baits t-shirt that I got from Wes, which is pretty cool. But this is the quote of the week. Don't you dare go to bed before you order some Ned from Wham Baits.